The door to room 304 was heavy, but Julian Sterling hit it with enough force to rattle the hinges. He burst into the dimly lit hospital room, his chest heaving, rainwater dripping from his expensive charcoal coat onto the sterile linoleum floor. He was prepared for blood. He was prepared for machines, for doctors shouting codes, for the terrifying silence of a life slipping away. When the call had come in 10 minutes ago, Clara Vance has been admitted, emergency situation. Julian's world had stopped. He had driven his Aston Martin through the streets of Boston at 90 miles an hour, praying to a God he hadn't spoken to in years. Don't take her. Take everything I have. Take the company. Take the money. But don't take her. Clara! He shouted, stepping into the room. But there was no blood. There were no crash carts. There was only a soft golden light from a bedside lamp. Clara was sitting up in the hospital bed. She looked exhausted, her auburn hair matted to her forehead, her skin pale. But she was alive, and she wasn't alone. In her arms she held 2 tiny bundles wrapped in striped hospital blankets. Newborns. Standing beside the bed with a hand resting possessively on Clara's shoulder was a man in blue scrubs. He was tall, with kind eyes, and the calm demeanor of someone who belonged here. He was wiping a sheen of sweat from Clara's forehead with a tenderness that made Julian's stomach lurch. The room went deadly silent. Julian froze in the doorway, the intruder in his own tragedy. He looked at the bundles. He looked at Clara. He looked at the man touching her. "Clara?" Julian whispered, the adrenaline crashing into confusion. Clara looked up. Her green eyes, which used to light up when he walked into a room, were dead, flat, cold. "Who called him?" she asked, her voice raspy. She didn't ask, "How are you?" She didn't say, "Thank God you're here." She looked at the man in scrubs. "Adrian, why is he here?" Before we dive deeper into this emotional roller coaster, I have a question for you. Have you ever been misunderstood so badly that it changed the course of your entire life? That is what we are exploring today, a story about secrets, stolen time, and the price of silence. If you enjoy stories that tug at your heartstrings, please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Join our family of story lovers. And I always love to know where my listeners are tuning in from. Drop a comment down below and tell me your city. Are you watching from Chicago? Lagos? Sydney? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let's go back to room 304. The man in scrubs, Adrian, stepped between Julian and the bed. It was a subtle movement, instinctive and protective, like a shield wall going up. "Mr. Sterling, I assume you were listed as the emergency contact in Clara's old files. That was a clerical error. You need to leave." Julian ignored him. He took a step forward, his eyes locked on the bundles. 2 of them. Tiny. Perfect. Dark hair that looked exactly like his own. "Are those—" Julian's voice failed him. He swallowed hard and tried again. "Are those mine?" Clara shifted in the bed, pulling the babies closer to her chest, as if Julian were a contagion she needed to protect them from. "Yours?" She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Biologically, maybe. But in every way that matters, Julian, they have nothing to do with you." "I didn't know," Julian stammered, the shock making him dizzy. "Clara, I swear to you, I didn't know you were pregnant. I thought you just left." "Stop," Clara snapped. The anger in her voice woke one of the babies, who let out a soft, high-pitched cry. Adrian immediately reached down, scooping the crying infant out of Clara's arms with practiced ease. He held the baby against his chest, swaying gently, shushing him. "It's okay, Leo. I've got you. It's okay." Julian watched, horrified. That was his son, Leo, and another man, a stranger, was holding him, comforting him, doing the job that Julian should have been doing. It felt like someone had reached into Julian's chest and ripped his heart out. "Give him to me," Julian said, stepping forward, his hands reaching out instinctively. "Don't you dare touch him," Clara hissed. Julian stopped, stunned by the venom in her voice. "Clara, please, I got a call. I thought you were dying. I rushed here, and now I find out I have twins? You have to explain this to me. Why didn't you tell me?" "Why didn't I tell you?" Clara stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I sent you a letter, Julian, 7 months ago. I hand-delivered it to your office. I gave you the ultrasound. I gave you the chance to be a father." Julian shook his head. "I never got a letter. I never saw an ultrasound." "You're lying," she said coldly, "just like you lied about loving me." "I'm not lying," Julian shouted, his control fraying. "I never got it. If I had known, I would have burned the city down to get to you. You know that." "Do I?" Clara challenged. "Because I have the email, Julian. I have the email you sent in reply." "What email?" "The one where you told me I was a liability." She recited the words from memory, words that were clearly etched into her soul. "The one where you said, 'I don't want them. Get rid of the problem or leave. You are worthless.'" The room spun. Julian grabbed the back of a visitor's chair to steady himself. "I never wrote that," he whispered. "Clara, look at me. You know me. I would never say that." "I thought I knew you," she said, her voice breaking for the first time. She looked at Adrian, who was still rocking Leo, and then down at the baby girl, Luna, still in her arms. "But then I read that email, and I realized that the man I loved was a fiction. So I did what you asked. I left. I disappeared. I survived." She looked back at Julian, and her expression hardened into stone.
"And now you show up here? Now? When the hard part is over? When Adrian has been here for every doctor's appointment, every scare, every midnight craving?" Julian looked at Adrian. The doctor wasn't just a doctor. He was the replacement. He was the man who had stepped into the vacuum Julian had unknowingly left behind. "I didn't send that email," Julian said again, desperate. "Check the timestamp. Check the—" "It doesn't matter," Clara interrupted quietly. "Even if you didn't type it, you weren't here. You created a world where I couldn't reach you. You chose your father. You chose the company. You shut me out long before that email was sent." She looked down at Luna. "You told me to die, Julian. Metaphorically or literally, it didn't matter. You told me to disappear. Adrian helped me live." She looked up at Adrian with a gaze so full of trust and gratitude that Julian felt physically sick. It was the look she used to give him. "Adrian," Clara said softly, "please make him leave." Adrian stepped forward, still holding Leo. He wasn't intimidated by Julian's wealth or his glare. He was a man protecting his family. "Mr. Sterling," Adrian said calmly, "you are upsetting the patients. Please leave, or I will call security." "These are my children," Julian snarled, his hands curling into fists. "You are holding my son. I am holding a baby whose heart rate is spiking because you are shouting. If you care about him at all, you will walk out that door." Julian looked at Leo. The baby was indeed fussing, reacting to the tension in the room. He looked at Clara, who was pale and shaking. He realized with a crushing weight that he was the villain in this scene. He was the monster under the bed. "I'm going to fix this," Julian said, his voice shaking. "I'm going to find out who sent that email, and I'm going to prove to you that I wanted them. I wanted us." "It's too late," Clara said, turning her face away. "Go back to your penthouse, Julian. Go back to your father. That's who you chose." Julian stood there for one more agonizing second. He memorized the faces of the children he might never hold. He memorized the sight of another man standing in his place. Then he turned and walked out. He walked into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind him, sealing off the warmth and the light. He stood in the sterile, fluorescent corridor of the hospital, alone. He pulled out his phone. His hands were trembling so hard he could barely unlock the screen. He opened his sent folder. He searched for Clara's name. Nothing. He searched the archives. Nothing. But Clara wasn't a liar. If she said there was an email, there was an email. Julian dialed his chief of security. "Wake up the IT team," Julian commanded, his voice deadly quiet. "I want a full audit of my private server. I want to know every login, every outgoing message, every deleted file from the last 7 months. And I want the location of my father." He hung up the phone and leaned his head against the cold hospital wall. Clara thought he was the villain, but Julian knew who the real villain was. And as he stood in the hallway, listening to the faint cry of his son through the closed door, Julian Sterling made a vow. He had lost his family. He had lost the love of his life. But someone was going to pay, and the payment would be everything they had.
To understand how a man could lose his soul in a single email, you have to understand that Julian Sterling wasn't always a ghost haunting the corridors of a hospital. 18 months ago, he was alive. It started, as most tragedies do, with a moment of perfect happiness. It was a Tuesday in October. Julian was standing on the terrace of the Sterling Logistics headquarters, overlooking the Boston Harbor. He was 32 years old, worth $4 billion, and completely bored with his existence, until she walked in. Clara Vance wasn't supposed to be in the executive boardroom. She was a junior marketing strategist from a consulting firm his father had hired to soften the company's image. She walked in wearing a thrifted emerald blazer that clashed with the gray steel of the office, holding a stack of charts that were sliding out of her hands. "I think you're wrong," she had said. Julian had turned from the window, eyebrows raised. No one told Julian Sterling he was wrong. "Excuse me?" "Your logistics strategy," Clara said, dropping the files on the table with a chaotic thud. "It's efficient, it's profitable, it's also soulless. You treat your drivers like robots. If you want the public to trust you, you have to show them you have a heart, assuming, of course, you actually have one." The room had gone silent. His father's executives looked terrified. But Julian had smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in months. "Show me," he said. That was the spark. The fire followed quickly. For the next 6 months, Julian and Clara were inseparable. It was a whirlwind romance that the tabloids called The Prince and the Pauper, a headline that made Clara roll her eyes and Julian grind his teeth. He loved her because she didn't care about the Sterling name. She lived in a third-floor walk-up in Beacon Hill that smelled like cinnamon and old books. She made him take off his $3,000 shoes at the door. She made him eat pizza on the floor. She made him laugh until his ribs ached. For the first time in his life, Julian wasn't the CEO. He was just Julian. "You're different when you're here," Clara whispered to him one night, tracing the line of his jaw as they lay in her narrow bed, the city lights filtering through the sheer curtains. "I hate who I am out there," Julian admitted, a vulnerability he had never shown anyone. "My father, he built this empire on ice. He expects me to be the same, cold, ruthless, unbreakable." "You don't have to be him," Clara said fiercely. "You can be better. You can be warm." "With you," Julian promised, kissing her palm. "I can be warm with you." It was the golden hour of their lives, but the sun always sets. The shift began 8 months ago. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, creeping frost. The catalyst was the Atlantic merger. Alistair Sterling, Julian's father and the chairman of the board, had decided to acquire their largest European competitor. It was a hostile takeover, aggressive and messy. Alistair called Julian into his study at the Sterling estate, a sprawling Gothic mansion in Brookline that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. "I am distracted," Alistair said. He didn't look up from his brandy sniffer. He was a man carved from granite, 60 years of power etched into his face. "I'm working 18 hours a day on the merger, Father," Julian said, loosening his tie. "I'm not distracted." "I'm talking about the girl," Alistair said.
The way he said girl made it sound like a disease. Clara, the marketing consultant? Her name is Clara, Julian said stiffly, and she is my partner. She is a liability, Alistair corrected smoothly. She comes from nothing, Julian. Her father was a mechanic. Her mother was a waitress. She looks at you and sees a lottery ticket. She doesn't understand our world. She doesn't understand sacrifice. She understands more than you do, Julian shot back. She makes me happy. Alistair stood up. He walked over to his son, his eyes cold and dead. Happiness is a luxury for poor people, Alistair said. We have responsibilities. This merger requires a wartime CEO, Julian, not a lovesick puppy. If you are not careful, she will be your ruin. You need to focus, cut the dead weight, or I will cut it for you. Julian walked out of that study furious. He told himself he wouldn't listen. He told himself he would protect Clara. But fear is a powerful poison. Julian started working later. He stopped going to the apartment in Beacon Hill. He started sleeping in his office. When he did see Clara, he was exhausted, irritable, smelling of the scotch he drank to numb the pressure from his father. He told himself he was doing it for her. I have to secure the legacy, he thought. I have to keep my father off my back so he doesn't come after her. But to Clara, it just looked like he was leaving. You're missing dinner again? Clara's voice was tinny over the phone speaker. Julian rubbed his temples. It was 9 p.m. on a Friday. I can't help it, Clara, Julian snapped. The European regulators are breathing down my neck. I have to be here. You don't have to be there, Julian. You're the boss. You can delegate. I don't understand, he said, the phrase becoming his mantra. My father is watching everything. If I slip up, if I show weakness... I'm not a weakness, Clara shouted. I'm your girlfriend. I'm the person you said you wanted to build a life with. But for the last 2 months, I've been dating a voicemail box. I am doing this for us, Julian roared, slamming his hand on his desk. Silence on the other end. No, Julian, Clara said softly. You're doing it for him. You're becoming him. She hung up. Julian stared at the phone. He wanted to call her back. He wanted to drive over there and hold her. But then he looked at the pile of documents on his desk, the looming deadline, the shadow of his father.
He poured another glass of whiskey instead. 7 months ago. Clara Vance sat on the edge of her bathtub, staring at a small white stick. 2 pink lines. Her heart did a somersault. Fear, joy, terror, hope. She was pregnant. She touched her stomach. A baby, a tiny piece of Julian growing inside her. For a moment, the fear paralyzed her. Julian had been so distant lately, so cold. Would he want this? Would he see it as another distraction, like his father said? But then she remembered the man who ate pizza on her floor. She remembered the man who whispered, "I can be warm with you." Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the miracle they needed. A baby would snap him out of his trance. It would remind him that there was more to life than mergers and acquisitions. It would give him a reason to fight his father, a reason to come home. Clara smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. She wasn't going to tell him over the phone. She wasn't going to send a text. This deserved a moment. She spent the night writing a letter. She poured her heart onto the paper. She told him she loved him. She told him she missed him. She told him that she knew he was under pressure, but that they were about to embark on the greatest adventure of their lives. She put the letter in a cream envelope. She included the positive test wrapped in a blue ribbon, and the confirmation slip from the clinic with the first ultrasound, just a tiny grain of rice on a black screen. Leo and Luna, she thought, though she didn't know it was twins yet. She just felt double the love. The next morning she dressed in her best coat. She felt strong. She felt like a mother. She walked to the Sterling Logistics Tower. It was 7 a.m. She knew Julian wouldn't be there yet. He usually arrived at 8. But she wanted to leave it on his desk, a surprise for him to find when he walked in. She imagined his face. She imagined him reading it, his eyes widening, the stress melting away. She imagined him running out of the building, coming to find her, picking her up and spinning her around. She walked into the lobby. The security guard, an old man named Frank who liked her, smiled. "Early start, Miss Vance?" "Special delivery, Frank."
He poured another glass of whiskey instead. 7 months ago. Clara Vance sat on the edge of her bathtub, staring at a small white stick. 2 pink lines. Her heart did a somersault. Fear, joy, terror, hope. She was pregnant. She touched her stomach. A baby, a tiny piece of Julian growing inside her. For a moment, the fear paralyzed her. Julian had been so distant lately, so cold. Would he want this? Would he see it as another distraction, like his father said? But then she remembered the man who ate pizza on her floor. She remembered the man who whispered, "I can be warm with you." Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the miracle they needed. A baby would snap him out of his trance. It would remind him that there was more to life than mergers and acquisitions. It would give him a reason to fight his father, a reason to come home. Clara smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. She wasn't going to tell him over the phone. She wasn't going to send a text. This deserved a moment. She spent the night writing a letter. She poured her heart onto the paper. She told him she loved him. She told him she missed him. She told him that she knew he was under pressure, but that they were about to embark on the greatest adventure of their lives. She put the letter in a cream envelope. She included the positive test wrapped in a blue ribbon and the confirmation slip from the clinic with the first ultrasound, just a tiny grain of rice on a black screen. Leo and Luna, she thought, though she didn't know it was twins yet. She just felt double the love. The next morning she dressed in her best coat. She felt strong. She felt like a mother. She walked to the Sterling Logistics Tower. It was 7 a.m. She knew Julian wouldn't be there yet. He usually arrived at 8. But she wanted to leave it on his desk, a surprise for him to find when he walked in. She imagined his face. She imagined him reading it, his eyes widening, the stress melting away. She imagined him running out of the building, coming to find her, picking her up and spinning her around. She walked into the lobby. The security guard, an old man named Frank who liked her, smiled. "Early start, Miss Vance?" "Special delivery, Frank," she beamed. She went up to the executive floor. It was quiet. The cleaners were just finishing up. Clara walked into Julian's office. It smelled like leather and stale whiskey, a smell that worried her, but she pushed the thought away. She placed the cream envelope squarely in the center of his glass desk. She kissed her fingertips and pressed them to the paper. "Come back to me, Julian," she whispered. She turned and walked out, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She went to a nearby coffee shop to wait for his call. She ordered a decaf tea and sat by the window, watching the phone, waiting for the ring that would change their lives. She didn't know that she had been watched. She didn't know that the moment the elevator doors closed behind her, the side door to the adjoining office opened. Alistair Sterling walked into his son's office. He wasn't supposed to be there, but Alistair was always where he wasn't supposed to be. He monitored everything, the cameras, the logs, the life of his son. He walked to the desk. He picked up the cream envelope. He smelled the faint scent of cinnamon on the paper. "Pathetic," Alistair sneered. He tore it open. He looked at the letter. He looked at the pregnancy test. He looked at the ultrasound. Alistair didn't feel joy. He didn't feel the warmth of a grandfather. He felt the cold calculation of a businessman seeing a liability. "A trap," he muttered. "She's trying to trap him, just like his mother did." If Julian saw this, the merger was dead.
Julian would turn soft. He would want to play happy family. He would neglect the empire. Alistair looked at the computer screen on Julian's desk. It was locked, but Alistair had the master admin override. He typed in the code. The screen flickered to life. Welcome, Julian. Alistair sat down in his son's chair. He cracked his knuckles. He wasn't just going to delete the letter. That wouldn't be enough. She would just come back. She would call. She would show up. No, he had to burn the bridge so thoroughly that she would never dare cross it again. He had to break her heart so completely that she would disappear. He opened the email client. He started a new message to Clara Vance. He looked at the ultrasound photo one last time, his own grandchildren, and felt nothing but disgust. He dropped the photo and the test into the metal wastebasket by the desk. He took a lighter from his pocket, Julian's lighter, and flicked it. He dropped the flame into the basket. As the smoke began to rise, curling around the expensive art on the walls, Alistair Sterling began to type.
The smoke from the wastebasket was thin and acrid, smelling of burnt paper and melted plastic. Alistair Sterling sat in his son's leather chair, watching the last corner of the ultrasound photograph curl into black ash. The tiny grain of rice, his own flesh and blood, disappeared into the fire without a sound. He turned his attention to the computer screen. He didn't feel guilt. Alistair had surgically removed his conscience decades ago, around the time he realized conscience was an expensive liability in the logistics business. He felt only the grim satisfaction of a gardener pruning a weed that threatened to choke his prize rose. Clara Vance. He typed her name into the recipient field. He stared at the blank white box of the email body. He had to sound like Julian, but not the Julian that Clara knew, the soft, laughing boy who ate pizza on the floor. He had to sound like the Julian that Alistair had created, the CEO, the cold, pragmatic machine. Alistair's fingers hovered over the keys. He knew exactly where to strike. He knew Clara's insecurities because he had had her investigated the moment Julian brought her name up. He knew about her financial struggles. He knew about her need to be valued for her mind, not her appearance. He began to type. Subject, regarding your letter. Clara, I found your package on my desk. To be honest, I was hoping for a marketing report, not a melodrama. Alistair paused. It needed to be final. It needed to be scorched earth. The timing is unfortunate, but let's be realistic. We both knew this relationship had an expiration date. The merger is my priority. My family legacy is my priority. You were a pleasant distraction, but a distraction nonetheless. As for the situation you described in your letter, I am not interested. I do not want children, certainly not now, and certainly not with someone who brings nothing to the table but debt and sentiment. Alistair smiled thinly. That would hurt her. You are a liability, Clara. I cannot have you dragging me down with domestic anchors while I am trying to secure a billion-dollar future. Get rid of the problem, or if you insist on keeping it, leave. Go somewhere I don't have to see you. He remembered the word Julian had used in his drunken rant about the merger last week. Julian had screamed, "I feel worthless," to his father. Alistair decided to repurpose it. You are suffocating me. In this world, you are worthless. Do not contact me again. My lawyers will arrange a financial settlement for your silence. Goodbye, Julian. Alistair read it over. It was cruel. It was monstrous. It was perfect. He pressed send. He watched the progress bar fill up. Sent. He deleted the email from the sent folder. He emptied the trash folder. He cleared the cache. He stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked out of the office through the side door, leaving the faint smell of smoke and the destruction of 3 lives hanging in the air. 5 blocks away, in the corner booth of the Daily Grind coffee shop, Clara Vance's phone buzzed. She jumped. She had been staring at the screen for 45 minutes, her tea growing cold. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs.
Julian. She picked up the phone with trembling hands. She expected a call. She expected his voice, breathless and excited. Instead, she saw a notification, new email from Julian Sterling. She frowned. An email? Why would he email her? Maybe he was in a meeting. Maybe he couldn't talk yet, but he wanted to send a quick note of love before he ran over to find her. She unlocked her phone. She opened the app. She read the first line. I was hoping for a marketing report, not a melodrama. Her breath hitched. A cold, heavy stone dropped into her stomach. She read on. Expiration date. Pleasant distraction. The noise of the coffee shop, the grinding beans, the indie music, the chatter, faded into a dull roar. The world narrowed down to the glowing screen in her hand. I do not want children, certainly not now, and certainly not with someone who brings nothing to the table but debt and sentiment. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. She blinked them away, trying to focus. This couldn't be Julian. This couldn't be the man who held her while she slept. Get rid of the problem. She put a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. He was talking about their baby. He was calling their child a problem. You are worthless. The word hit her like a physical slap. It echoed the deepest, darkest fear she had carried her entire life, that she wasn't enough, that she was just the poor girl from the wrong side of the tracks, playing dress-up in a world she didn't belong in. Clara dropped the phone on the table. It clattered loudly. She felt like she was going to throw up. The morning sickness, which had been a low-level nausea all week, suddenly surged with violent intensity. She grabbed her purse and ran. She ran out of the coffee shop, ignoring the barista calling after her. She ran onto the sidewalk, gasping for air. The city felt hostile. The skyscrapers loomed over her like judgment. He doesn't want us. He thinks I'm worthless. She walked blindly, tears streaming down her face, bumping into pedestrians who muttered annoyed apologies. She walked until her legs gave out. She found herself at the edge of the public garden. It was a gray, overcast morning. The flowers were dead, waiting for spring. Clara stumbled over to a wrought iron bench and collapsed. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, rocking back and forth. I'm sorry, she whispered to the tiny life inside her. I'm so sorry. I thought he loved us. She felt dizzy. Black spots danced at the edge of her vision. She hadn't eaten. The shock was sending her into a tailspin. She leaned forward, putting her head between her knees, trying to keep the world from tilting.
Miss? A voice, gentle, concerned. Miss, are you all right? Clara didn't look up. She couldn't. Go away. You look like you're about to pass out, the voice said. It was closer now. I'm a doctor. Can I help you? Clara lifted her head slowly. Standing there was a man in a jogging suit, holding a water bottle. He had dark, curly hair and kind eyes that were crinkled in genuine worry. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't looking at his watch. He was just looking at her. Clara tried to speak, but her throat closed up. I can't breathe. The man sat down next to her, not too close, just close enough to offer support. He unscrewed the cap of his water bottle. Here, he said softly, take small sips, deep breaths, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Clara took the water. Her hands were shaking so bad she spilled some on her chin. The man didn't laugh. He didn't look away. I'm Adrian, he said. Dr. Adrian Hale. I work at Mass General just down the street. I'm pregnant, Clara blurted out. She didn't know why she said it. Maybe because it was the only truth she had left. Alistair's expression softened even more. Okay, that explains the dizziness. When did you last eat? I don't know. Yesterday? Alistair frowned. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a granola bar. Eat this slowly. It's peanut butter. Is that okay? Clara nodded. She took a bite. The sugar and protein hit her system and the black spots began to fade. Thank you, she whispered. Did something happen? Alistair asked gently. Do you need me to call someone? A partner? A husband? Clara let out a choked laugh that turned into a sob. No, said Clara, looking at her phone where the email still glowed on the screen. No partner. Not anymore. He told me to get rid of the problem." Alistair's jaw tightened. He looked at the crying woman, seeing the devastation in her eyes. He didn't know the whole story, but he knew enough. "Well," Alistair said, his voice firm and steady like an anchor, "I'm a pediatrician, and in my professional opinion, a baby is never a problem. A baby is a person." Clara looked at him. For the first time in an hour, she felt seen, not as a liability, not as a distraction, but as a person. "I'm Clara," she whispered. "Nice to meet you, Clara," Alistair said. "Let's get you some real food, my treat." And in the shadow of the tragedy that Julian Sterling's father had orchestrated, a new foundation began to pour. Not one built on passion and skyscrapers, but one built on kindness and granola bars. 1 hour later, Julian Sterling walked into his office. He was hungover. His head throbbed. He smelled like the scotch he had drowned himself in the night before. He walked to his desk. He frowned. There was a faint smell in the air. Something burnt. He looked at the metal wastebasket. There was a small pile of ash at the bottom. Odd, he thought. The cleaners must have emptied an ashtray. He sat down in his leather chair. He unlocked his computer. He checked his phone. No messages from Clara. He felt a pang of disappointment, followed quickly by irritation. He had been pulling away, yes, he had been distant, but he expected her to fight for him. He expected her to call, to demand to see him, to break through his walls like she used to. "Marcus," he barked into the intercom, "did anyone come by for me this morning?" "No, sir," his assistant replied. "Your father was here early, but no one else." Julian sighed. His father. Always his father. He opened his email. He scanned the inbox. Nothing from Clara. He checked the sent folder. It was empty, save for a few business memos he had sent yesterday. "She's giving up," he thought, the insecurity gnawing at him. My father was right. She got tired of the work. She got tired of the difficult man. He waited all day. He stared at his phone during meetings. He checked his texts every 5 minutes. By 5 p.m., the silence was deafening. He couldn't take it anymore. He left the office. He told his driver to take him to Beacon Hill. He ran up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. He knocked. "Clara?" No answer. He used the key she'd given him, the key he kept on a separate ring hidden from his father. He pushed the door open. The apartment was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of life. The closets were open and bare. The photos were gone from the mantel. The smell of cinnamon was fading, replaced by the smell of dust. On the kitchen counter was a key, his key, and a note. It wasn't a letter. It was a scrap of paper torn from a notebook. "You win. I'm gone." Julian stared at the note. He didn't understand. You win. What was that supposed to mean? What game were they playing? He pulled out his phone and dialed her number. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected." She had changed her number. She had packed her bags. She had vanished. Julian sank onto the floor of the empty kitchen. The confusion turned into a cold, hard knot of anger. "She left me," he thought. "She didn't even say goodbye. She just ran." Alistair's voice echoed in his head. "She looks at you and sees a lottery ticket. When it gets hard, she will leave." "You were right," Julian whispered to the empty room. "You were right." He stood up. He left the key on the counter. He walked out of the apartment and locked the door on the only happiness he had ever known. He went back to the penthouse. He poured a glass of scotch, and he drank until he couldn't feel the hole in his chest anymore. He didn't know that miles away, Clara was sleeping on Adrian Hale's couch because she had nowhere else to go. She didn't know she was dreaming of blue eyes and betrayal. He just knew that he was alone, and this time he decided he would stay that way. The Ice King returned to his throne, and he froze his heart shut.
The hallway of Mass General Hospital was quiet, save for the hum of the vending machine and the distant squeak of nurses' shoes. Julian Sterling stood with his back against the cold wall, staring at the closed door of room 304. He had been standing there for 20 minutes. Security had walked by twice, eyeing his ruined coat and the desperate look in his eyes, but they hadn't approached him yet. Maybe his glare was enough to keep them at bay. Inside that room, another man was holding his son. Inside that room, the woman he loved looked at him like he was a monster. Get rid of the problem. The words echoed in his skull. He hadn't written them. He knew he hadn't. But Clara believed he had, and that belief had cost him everything. The door clicked open. Julian straightened, his heart leaping into his throat. Clara stepped out. She looked fragile, wrapped in a hospital robe, holding a plastic cup of water. She didn't look at him initially. She leaned against the doorframe as if her legs couldn't quite support her weight. "Clara," Julian whispered. She looked up. Her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was just tired, bone-deep exhausted. "You're still here," she said flatly. "Adrian said you left." "I can't leave," Julian said, taking a tentative step toward her. "Not until I see it. You said I sent an email. I need to see it." Clara stared at him for a long moment. She was searching his face, looking for the lie. Finally, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen a few times and held it out to him. "Here," she said. "Read it and tell me that isn't your signature." Julian took the phone. His hand shook. He read the words. "I was hoping for a marketing report, not a melodrama. You are a liability. Get rid of the problem. You are worthless." Julian felt the bile rise in his throat. He read the timestamp, November 13th, 7:42 a.m. November 13th, Julian muttered, his mind racing back. That was the morning after the anniversary. I was hungover. I came in late. I didn't get to the office until 9 a.m. He looked at Clara. "Clara, look at the timestamp, 7:42 a.m. I wasn't even in the building. I was still at the penthouse." "You could have sent it from your phone," Clara said, taking hers back. "I didn't, and this phrasing," Julian pointed at the screen, "worthless. I said that word the night before. I screamed it at my father during an argument about the merger. I told him he made me feel worthless." The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. Only one other person knew that word. Only one other person had access to his office, his computer, and his passwords. Only one other person wanted Clara gone this badly. "My father," Julian whispered. The rage that filled him was so hot it almost brought him to his knees. "He was in my office. He intercepted the letter." "Julian, stop," Clara said wearily. "It doesn't matter who hit send. It came from you. It came from your world." "It matters to me," Julian shouted. A nurse down the hall shushed him aggressively. He lowered his voice, trembling. "He stole you from me, Clara. He stole my children. I am going to kill him." "Go ahead," Clara said, turning back to the door. "Go fight your wars, but don't think for a second that finding a scapegoat fixes this." "It fixes the lie," Julian pleaded. "If I prove it wasn't me, we can start over." Clara looked at him with pity. "You really don't get it, do you?" She slipped back into the room and the door clicked shut. Julian stood there for 1 second longer. Then he turned and ran. The sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon when Julian's Aston Martin screeched through the iron gates of the Sterling estate in Brookline. He didn't bother buzzing the intercom. He rammed the gates. The metal groaned and bent, the lock snapping with a sound like a gunshot, but the car forced its way through. He didn't care about the damage. He didn't care about anything. He drove up the long driveway and slammed on the brakes in front of the manor. He leapt out of the car and stormed up the steps. He used his key to open the massive front door. "Alairster!" Julian roared, his voice echoing through the marble foyer. "Alairster!" The house was quiet. The staff was likely hiding. Julian took the stairs 2 at a time. He went straight to the breakfast room. Alairster Sterling was sitting at the head of the long table, reading the Wall Street Journal. He was wearing a silk robe, sipping coffee from a china cup. He looked calm. He looked untouchable. He didn't look up when Julian burst into the room. "You're early," Alairster said calmly, "and you're loud. It's uncivilized."
Did you send it? Julian demanded, slamming his hands onto the table, shaking the silverware. November 13th, the email to Clara. Did you send it? Alastair folded his newspaper carefully. He placed it next to his plate. He looked up at his son, his eyes cold and unimpressed. You were spiraling, Alastair said. You were distracted. I removed the distraction. She was pregnant, Julian screamed. She sent me an ultrasound. You saw my children, and you told her to get rid of them? I saw a trap, Alastair corrected. I saw a gold digger trying to anchor herself to a fortune she didn't earn. And considering the mess you're in right now, smelling of hospital disinfectant and desperation, I'd say I was right. They are your grandchildren, Julian whispered, the horror of it choking him. Leo and Luna, twins. They were born last night. Alastair paused. He took a sip of coffee. Twins. That is unfortunate. Expensive.
Unfortunate? Julian grabbed the coffee cup from his father's hand and threw it across the room. It shattered against the fireplace, dark liquid staining the expensive rug. Alistair didn't flinch. Control yourself, Julian. I am done controlling myself, Julian yelled. You stole 7 months of my life. You let me believe she left me. You let her believe I wanted our babies dead. You are a monster. I am a businessman, Alistair snapped, standing up. I did what was necessary to secure the merger. And it worked, didn't it? The stock is up 20%. The European deal is closed. You are wealthy beyond measure. You're welcome. I don't want the money, Julian said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. I don't want the merger. I don't want the name. Don't be dramatic. You are a sterling. You are nothing without me. Watch me, Julian said. He pulled out his phone. He dialed a number. Yes, Agent Miller, this is Julian Sterling. I'm ready to talk about the Cayman accounts and the bribe to the zoning commissioner last year. I have the files. Alistair's face went white. Put the phone down. I'm at the Sterling estate, Julian said into the phone, his eyes locked on his father. Come, pick him up. He hung up. You just destroyed the company, Alistair whispered, gripping the edge of the table. You just destroyed your own inheritance. I bought my freedom, and I bought justice for my wife. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving his father standing in the wreckage of a dynasty that had taken 60 years to build and 60 seconds to dismantle. Julian returned to the hospital an hour later. He felt lighter. He felt clean. He had torched the kingdom to save the princess. Surely that counted for something. Surely that was the grand gesture that fixed everything. He walked to the NICU. He had been told Clara was there now, feeding the babies. He found her in a rocking chair, holding Luna. Adrian was in the chair next to her, holding Leo. They were talking softly, laughing about something. It looked intimate. It looked complete. Julian knocked on the glass. Clara looked up. Her smile faded. She motioned for him to come in. Julian walked in. He stood at the foot of the chairs. It's done. I confronted him. He admitted it. He sent the email, Clara. He saw the ultrasound and he threw it away. I called the FBI. He's going to prison. I burned the company down. He waited. He waited for the relief. He waited for her to cry, to hug him, to say, "Oh, Julian, I'm so sorry I doubted you." Clara looked at him. Her eyes were sad. You destroyed your company? Asked Clara. I don't care about the company. I only care about you, about them. I proved it, Clara. I didn't send that email. I didn't reject you. I believe you, Clara said softly. Julian felt a surge of hope. Then we can fix this. I can buy a house. We can move. I can be a father. Clara shook her head slowly. Julian, I believe you didn't type those words, but do you know where I was when I read them? The coffee shop? I was in the park. I was throwing up in a trash can because I was so dizzy from hunger and shock. I sat on a bench for 2 hours, terrified, thinking my life was over. She looked at Adrian. Do you know who found me? Him, Julian said bitterly, gesturing to the doctor. Yes, Clara said. He bought me a granola bar. He listened. He didn't ask for a merger. He didn't ask for a legacy. He just asked if I was okay. She looked back at Julian.
You proved you didn't send the email, but Julian, you created the vacuum that allowed it to happen. You were absent for months before that letter was sent. You let your father into our lives. You prioritized the business until there was no room left for me. I'm changing that, Julian insisted. I just turned my father in. It's too late, Clara said. The words were quiet, but they hit harder than a scream. You weren't there when I heard their heartbeats for the first time. Adrian was. You weren't there when I was on bed rest and couldn't walk to the bathroom. Adrian carried me. You weren't there last night when they cut me open to get them out. Adrian was holding my hand. She looked down at Luna, sleeping peacefully. A father isn't the man who provides the DNA, Julian. A father is the man who shows up. Adrian is their father. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. You're together? We are, Clara said. He loves them, and he loves me, and he has never, not once, made me feel worthless. Julian looked at Adrian. The doctor didn't look triumphant. He looked sympathetic. He looked like a good man, a better man. I can fight this, Julian whispered. I can get lawyers. I have rights. You could, Clara agreed. You could drag us through court. You could force visitation. You could spend your money to make our lives miserable. She looked him dead in the eye. But if you love them, if you actually love them, you'll let them be happy. You'll let them have the stable family they have right now. Julian looked at Luna, asleep in Adrian's arms. He looked at Leo, asleep in Adrian's arms. He looked at the woman he had loved more than anything, the woman he had failed to protect. He realized then that the tragedy wasn't the email. The tragedy was that he had woken up too late. Julian's voice broke. He swallowed the sob that was threatening to tear him apart. He looked at Adrian. Take care of them. I will, Adrian said solemnly. With my life. Julian nodded. He stepped back. I'll set up a trust, Julian said, his voice hollow. For their education, for everything. You won't have to worry about money. Thank you, Clara said. Goodbye, Clara. Goodbye, Julian. He turned and walked out of the NICU. He walked past the nurse's station. He walked out of the hospital and into the morning sun. He was a billionaire. He was free of his father. He was young. But as he stood on the sidewalk, watching the city of Boston wake up, Julian Sterling knew the truth. He was the poorest man on earth.
2 years. 2 years is enough time for a skyscraper to be built. It is enough time for a fortune to be lost, and it is enough time for a heart to break, heal, and scar over into something new. Julian Sterling stood in front of the mirror in his small apartment in Cambridge. He adjusted his tie, a simple navy silk, not the $400 Italian cravats he used to wear. He smoothed the lapels of his suit. It was off the rack. It fit well enough. He looked older. There were silver strands in his dark hair now, specifically at the temples. Lines etched around his eyes that hadn't been there when he was a billionaire. He wasn't a billionaire anymore. When the FBI had raided the Sterling estate, they had seized almost everything. What they didn't seize, Julian had liquidated. He had sold the penthouse. He had sold the Aston Martin. He had sold the watches. He had taken the proceeds and put them into 3 irrevocable trusts. One for Leo, one for Luna, and one for Clara. He lived on a teacher's salary now. He taught business ethics at a local community college. The irony wasn't lost on him. He checked his watch. 3 p.m. It was time to go. He walked out to his used sedan. On the passenger seat sat a gift wrapped in silver paper. It was a first edition of The Velveteen Rabbit, Clara's favorite book. He drove out to the countryside. The wedding was at a vineyard an hour outside of Boston. The autumn leaves were turning gold and crimson, a firework display against the gray sky. Julian's hands gripped the steering wheel. He wasn't the groom. He wasn't the best man. He was the guest, the ex-husband, the biological father, the mistake.
The venue was breathtaking. A rustic barn draped in white chiffon and fairy lights, surrounded by rows of grapevines. Julian parked in the back of the lot. He waited until most of the guests had gone in. He didn't want to make a scene. He didn't want the whispers. "Look, that's the Sterling boy, the one who burned down his father's company." He walked toward the ceremony seating. He stood in the very back row, behind a large floral arrangement. The music started. A string quartet playing a soft acoustic version of "Can't Help Falling in Love." The doors of the barn opened. First came the flower girl and ring bearer. Julian's breath caught in his throat. Luna, 2 years old, wobbled down the aisle in a white dress, dropping petals with intense concentration. She had Julian's dark curls and Clara's nose. Leo walked beside her, holding a pillow that was slightly too big for him. He looked like a miniature gentleman in his tiny suspenders. Julian felt a physical ache in his chest, a hollowness that would never be filled. He saw them every other weekend. He was Julian to them, not Daddy. Daddy was the man waiting at the altar. Adrian Hale stood under the floral arch. He looked handsome in a gray suit. He wasn't wealthy, he wasn't powerful, but he looked happy. He looked steady. And then Clara appeared. She was walking alone. Her parents had passed away years ago, and she had no one to give her away. But she didn't look lonely. She looked triumphant. Her dress was simple lace, vintage and elegant. Her hair was loose. She was smiling, a radiant, blinding smile that Julian hadn't seen directed at him in years. She walked down the aisle. She didn't look at the back row. She only had eyes for Adrian. Julian watched the woman he loved marry the man who had saved her. "I, Adrian, take you, Clara." Julian closed his eyes. He listened to the vows. They promised to be there in sickness and in health. They promised to listen. They promised to never make the other feel worthless. "I, Clara, take you, Adrian." Her voice was strong. "You caught me when I was falling. You loved me when I was broken. You are the father my children deserve." Julian bowed his head. He accepted the sentence. "You may kiss the bride." The applause was thunderous. Julian clapped. He clapped until his palms stung. He watched them walk back down the aisle. Adrian holding Clara's hand, Leo and Luna running after them, laughing. It was a perfect family picture, and Julian was entirely outside the frame. The reception was held in a large tent on the lawn. Julian stayed on the periphery. He took a glass of champagne but didn't drink it. He watched the first dance. He watched Adrian spin Clara around. He watched the way Clara rested her head on Adrian's shoulder, a gesture of complete safety. "I couldn't give her that," Julian thought. "I gave her skyscrapers. I gave her diamonds. But I never gave her safety." "Mr. Sterling," Julian turned. A young woman, the wedding planner, was standing there with a clipboard. "Yes?" "I just wanted to confirm," she lowered her voice discreetly. "The balance for the venue, the catering, and the band, it has all been taken care of?" "Yes," Julian said quietly. "It was paid in full this morning." "And the couple, they don't know?" "No," Julian said, "and they never will. It was an anonymous gift from a grateful patient of Dr. Hale's. That is the story. Do you understand?" The planner looked at him with wide eyes. She nodded. "I understand. That is very generous of you, sir. It's the least I can do."
He checked his watch. He had stayed long enough to show respect, but not long enough to make people uncomfortable. He walked over to the gift table. He placed the silver-wrapped book on the pile. Inside the cover, he had written a note to the twins. "For Leo and Luna, be brave, be kind, and know that you are loved, from near and far." He turned to leave. "Julian!" He froze. Clara was standing behind him. She was holding a glass of wine. She looked flushed and happy. "Clara," he said, turning around, "you look stunning." "Thank you," she said. She looked at his suit. She looked at the gray in his hair. "You came." "I was invited," he said, with a small, sad smile. "I wouldn't miss it." "How are you?" she asked. It wasn't a pleasantry. She really wanted to know. "I'm good," Julian lied. "Teaching is rewarding. It's quiet." No mergers, no hostile takeovers. I heard about your father, Clara said softly. 20 years, Julian said. He won't be getting out. The company is gone. The legacy is dead. Not all of it, Clara said. She gestured toward the dance floor, where Leo and Luna were currently trying to dance with Adrian's legs. They have your eyes, Julian, and your stubbornness. Julian looked at his children. They have your heart, he said. That's what matters. He looked back at her. Clara, I want you to know, I'm happy for you. Truly, Adrian is a good man. He is, Clara said. She hesitated, then stepped closer. She placed a hand on his arm. Thank you, Julian. For what? For doing the right thing, in the end. You burned down your life to protect us. I know what that cost you. It cost me nothing that was real. I kept the only thing that mattered. What's that? My conscience, he said, and the knowledge that you are safe. He gently covered her hand with his for a second, then stepped back. Go back to your husband, he said. It's your night. Clara looked at him for a moment longer. There was no romance in her eyes, no lingering spark, but there was forgiveness, and that was more than he deserved. Goodbye, Julian. Goodbye, Clara. She turned and walked back to the dance floor. Adrian saw her coming. He opened his arms, and she stepped into them, dissolving into the music and the light. Julian put his hands in his pockets. He walked out of the tent. The night air was crisp and cold. The stars were bright above the vineyard. He walked to his car. He could hear the music fading behind him. He thought about his father, sitting in a cell in federal prison, still believing that money was the only way to keep score. He thought about Clara, dancing with the man who had bought her a granola bar when she was fainting. He thought about the twins, who would grow up safe, funded by the trust he had set up, protected by the sacrifice he had made. Julian Sterling unlocked his cheap sedan. He sat in the driver's seat. He was alone. He would go home to an empty apartment. He would wake up tomorrow and grade papers. But as he looked in the rearview mirror, he didn't see the hollow ghost of a billionaire anymore. He saw a man who had made a terrible mistake and then spent every day since trying to pay for it. He wasn't the hero of the story. He wasn't the one who got the girl. But he had broken the cycle. He had stopped the poison from reaching the next generation. And as he started the engine and drove away into the dark, Julian realized that was a legacy he could live with. If this story touched your soul, please leave a like on the video. It helps us share these emotional journeys with more people. And if you haven't joined the family yet, hit the subscribe button. We have a brand new story coming next week about a homeless man who finds a lost diary, and the secret inside changes everything.